Hello, thank you very much for tuning in. So, somewhere around about 2014, a certain Eric called into the Atheist Experience and challenged Matt to a debate. So he came on. I mean, nobody had really ever heard of him. And I mean, it could be just John Doe's calling in saying, "Hey, Matt, I want to debate you." And Matt, of course, said, "Sure, if you can set it all up, I'll debate you." And by that, what Matt meant was, if you can find somebody to organize it, if you can pay for it and cover my fee, etc., I'll do it. Of course, that never materialized. And in fact, during the call, after Eric had wasted about 10 minutes boasting that, I don't know, he'd defeated a certain number of atheists and he'd won votes, and he was basically bragging about what a good debater he was and that he'd trounced certain atheists, etc. So they went for 10 minutes, or at least he boasted for 10 minutes, said, "Oh, let's have a debate, let's have a debate." What's the AXP4 call-in show? It's for theists to present their points and to have a kind of discussion or debate on the spot. Eventually, of course, Matt said, "Do you have something you want to, do it quickly now? Let's give us your best shot." And I think he essentially went to something can't come from nothing. He went to the causality argument. That lasted about 5 or 6 minutes. Premises were not accepted and the call ended. I thought that would be the end of it. I had no idea that this would end up as an actual debate and Matt really would debate him. And obviously they did not get onto a stage. They did it on a I don't know, some kind of YouTube platform with a channel hosting it. But nevertheless, I've started listening to it. I've heard Eric's opening statement. I've heard Matt's opening statement. And I'm going to play you something now in a moment, because Eric is about to rebut Matt's point that the God hypothesis has got no explanatory power, something I happen to agree with. I don't believe it has, not in any way that's really meaningful. But before that, Eric had rebutted Matt's point that you can't try to solve one mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery. Eric rebutted that by saying, well, we're listening to, with radio telescopes, to signals coming in from the universe. And we are, by listening for these signals, appealing to a mystery. So I don't really think that's quite the same thing, is it? If you're listening for signals coming in. Actually, you're not really appealing to a mystery at all by what you're trying to do is gather evidence, aren't you? You're gathering evidence, and then if you get the evidence, you try to work out, for example, the signals come in, and you would only be appealing to a bigger mystery if you said, oh, it's the, I don't know, it's a character which I dreamed of called Zorgon, in a certain constellation. That would be an example of appealing to a bigger mystery to solve the mystery of where did these signals come from. And then he said, well, it would also be if you found somebody dead in the street. The police do this all the time. And it happened that a van went past, a van was seen going past and somebody was shooting out of the window. And that would be like a mystery as well that you'd be appealing to. Like, we've got a mystery of the dead person. We see a van. We don't know its motive. We don't know where it's gone. We don't know where it's come from. So we're appealing to a bigger mystery there. Well, that's not really the same thing either, because in this sense, again, we've got data, but we're not really drawing conclusions from the data. It would be appealing to a bigger mystery there if we said that, if we postulated that the van had materialized by means of some kind of supernatural means. So I think he's wrong there, but let's just move on from that. And we're going to go through and listen to what he thinks God explanatory power is. And I'll be stopping. I've already listened to it, of course. I've got some points. Let's go.
That the God hypothesis has no explanatory power. It certainly does, Matt. It has amazing explanatory power.
I'm all ears.
It explains why when you go ahead and if you were to commit a murder, why you would feel guilty. It explains why, no matter how hard you try, you cannot deny the fact that you have free will.
Okay, well, just first of all, obviously on the first one, of course, not all of us feel guilty. I mean, not all people who commit murders feel guilty. And obviously there are reasons for that. Human psychology is very complicated. Some people have got personality disorders and they don't have a kind of sense of guilt. They don't have an empathy for suffering. So I don't really accept that. We've got naturalistic explanations as to why people feel guilty for things that they do and why other people don't feel guilty for things that they do. So I reject that one straight away. The God hypothesis is no explanation for that at all.
Will. It explains.
Yeah, okay, so sorry, you missed that, my fault. He said that the God hypothesis explains why we know we've got free will. Well, that assumes that we admit that we have actually got free will. So he's presuming that, me and a lot of other people. I'm not so sure that we have that the free will concept is actually sort of meaningful and works in any sort of philosophical sense that I've read, one that is unproblematic. So I would also reject that one because I don't really know that I've got free will. So that doesn't work either. That doesn't explain anything either.
Why there is an inward testimony inside of you that you are of far greater value than a dog or a mouse or a cockroach.
No, absolutely wrong. I mean, obviously, I mean, in the sense that I'm not a vegan and, you know, so yeah, I do exploit animals in that sense. That's not because I think that I'm any better than they are. I suppose it's because I've got the power to do it. But that doesn't mean to say that I think I'm any better than an ant. And I suppose if I'm out walking and I see an ant, I might well step over it rather than step on it. So I don't agree with that myself. And he's making assumptions about Matt, that Matt thinks that he's any better than a cockroach. And Matt will probably come onto this, and I haven't heard Matt's response. I guess that he will deal with that maybe the same way that I've dealt with it, that he's assuming a lot there. And a lot of people will not think automatically that they're any better than any other living creatures. And ironically, or rather predictably, it might well be religious people who do think that they're better than other creatures.
It explains the fact of the resurrection. It explains.
Well, of course, magic can explain anything, can't it? I mean, if you've got, say, I don't know, Harry Potter with magical things happening in it, if, I don't know, is it Dumbledore? You know, I don't read Harry Potter, but whoever the magic witch or wizard is, of course, if that being really exists, then it will explain the magical happenings in the book, if we're to believe that it's supposed to be based on reality. And of course, if God is real, that just begs the question, doesn't it? Because for me and a lot of other people, the resurrection is just a story. And if you're saying that the resurrection really happened and we know it, and one way to explain how it happened is that there really is a God, and that would have the explanatory power for explaining this miraculous event. Well, of course, but I mean, when we talk about God's got no explanatory power, we're not talking about miracles in a 2,000-year-old book or in any book at all. We're not talking about those kind of explanations. What we're talking about is the natural world. Where did everything come from, if it came from anywhere at all? Questions like that. How did the universe develop? How did abiogenesis happen? Etc., etc., etc. When we're talking about explanatory power, for me, that's what we mean. We're not talking about justifications for biblical events.
Explains how men like the Apostle Paul who was vehemently opposed to Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, the Apostle Paul made you and every other atheist that I've ever known look like a sissy atheist, because this is a man, was he vehemently opposed to Christianity, but he went out persecuting Christians, wanting to put them to death.
Okay, so what we've got there, this is unbelievable, that Eric is arguing. How many atheists in 2 millennia do you think there have been who've switched to the other side? We've seen it. Of course, we've seen atheists become Christians. We've seen Francis Collins get down on his knees and become a born-again Christian. We've seen atheists suddenly become, in history, become Christians and suddenly try to stop persecution of Christians or whatever. We've seen them become very keen on their religion. And what Eric is arguing is that this atheist Paul, who was persecuting Christians, could not possibly have converted to Christianity unless there really was a God. It's the only way to explain it. It's not maybe, as in fact some have suggested, that Paul was going out and persecuting Christians. He was watching them being put to death, etc., etc. And it could not be possibly that maybe, I don't know, he had some kind of strange, he might have suddenly started to feel guilty about this thing. It's not really a nice thing that I'm doing here. And maybe he came across some writings, some early writings or something in the oral tradition, and it gradually got to work on him. Oh, actually, Jesus, he was quite a wise man, actually, wasn't he? And I've been doing all this to his followers. God damn it. I can't believe this. I think that I actually think that Jesus may well be the second coming. He may well be the Messiah. I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that there's just a completely naturalistic explanation. As I said, human psychology is a very, very strange thing, and people do suddenly just change to the other side, perhaps for no explainable reason whatsoever. And to postulate or to insist that the only way to explain this is that a God really exists is just, in my opinion, a complete failure in reason.
But yet this man experienced a appearance of Christ that to such a degree that not only did he have a complete dramatic change in his opinion, but he would spend the rest of his life preaching this gospel. So,
well, this is the way the story goes, and a story is always far more impressive if somebody is persecuting a set of believers and then having this epiphany, this big experience, and converting over to that side makes it look like it's a much more inspiring story to hopefully get more believers in. And Eric's talking about this as if it really happened, as if it's a fact, stating, oh, he had a vision of Christ, etc., etc. These are claims which have not been established as facts.
How can somebody go ahead and explain that? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to contend, Matt, that you cannot explain the transformation in the life of the Apostle Paul in light of what the Scripture says happened, and not only that, but in light of what the historical evidence was.
Well, what he's saying there is a very cunning use of language. He's saying you can't explain what happened to Paul in light of what the Scripture says. In other words, if you believe in the truth of the Scripture, then there's no other explanation. Well, of course, the Scripture's saying that God exists, but we're not explaining it not that it really matters, but we're not explaining it in the light, in the truth of the Scripture. We're trying to find the most reasonable explanation. Either it didn't happen, it was all made up, or if he did convert, he converted through purely naturalistic means. Is probably the most likely explanation, because it does not appeal to the supernatural.
Not only that, but the evidence also gives significant explanatory power as to when you go ahead and you look at the gospel, it does give explanatory power by saying that there is a God, because one, it finally provides a means for Jesus to be raised from the dead.
Well, I've been through this already. He's begging the question. We've got a story in the book. We've got claims. We've got to prove that those claims are correct. And if you're going to say that, well, we know that it could have happened. We know it did happen. There were the means for it to happen because there's a God. Then you're presupposing the existence of God to prove what you're trying to prove by some other means. It's just circular. So again, a failure in reasoning.
Because all of these other religions,
Yeah, sorry, you're using God to prove God. Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
whenever anybody claims that there is a God, the question is, if they claim that there was a dying and rising God, one of the first questions that somebody should ask is, how did this person die, and how did they, or why did they die, and how were they raised from the dead? Because if there's no tool to raise the person from the dead.
Yeah, okay. All right. So the question is with the resurrection is, well, first of all, is it an accurate story? Can we say that Jesus died? Okay, well, let's say that Jesus died. But then you've got the next problem, the claim that he was raised from the dead. And this is the problem. This is where you run into a brick wall. How can you confirm that Jesus was raised by the dead? Well, you can't. It's a matter of faith. So you can't go any further in terms of saying, well, God is the explanation for that. No. First, you've got to prove that Jesus really was raised from the dead. And he's not doing that. He's not doing that. He's presupposing the existence of God.
Then obviously the person is not going to rise. So once the fact of God is introduced, then the concept...
No, yeah, of course. Again, this cunning use of language, once the fact of God is introduced. In other words, if I presuppose God, I can explain anything. Okay, well, I'm not going to continue. I'm going to post a link to this. Wow, I'm just looking at the video time here. It says 2.5 hours and I'm only 42 minutes into it. I'm going to listen to the whole thing and I might make another video with some more thoughts, but this is awful. This is really, really bad. All his points are absolutely terrible. However, I thought you guys would find it amusing because I know that you probably, a lot of you probably remember when Eric called in, and somebody did actually mention to me that there is a debate out there somewhere, but I didn't go and look for it, to my shame. That was about a year ago. But anyway, I did find it just by pure accident. So yeah, that's about it. Let me know what your thoughts are. But in terms of Christian opponents, I think that, I mean, Matt has faced some very, very poor Christian opponents, but yeah, he maybe has faced one or two that are as bad as Eric. I'm just thinking about, is it Stuart Connectually and his father? They were bad. But I don't even think they would use some of these arguments. So no, there's no explanatory power. Half of his points, I mean, he's referring to human nature with 2 or 3 of his points. You know, the fact that we've got a conscience, the disputable thing about free will, that we're so-called better. We know we're better than other animals. Well, we don't really, do we? I mean, is that what Christianity is? That what the explanatory power of Christianity is? And then the rest of it is just all theology. How did Jesus rise from the dead? How can we explain the miracles, etc., etc.? It's got fantastic explanatory power for the resurrection and the miracles, but hey, we don't know that any of those happened, and that's what you're trying to prove. Okay, well, that's enough from me. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your comments. Bye for now.